In just 3 days, more than 200 people were executed without trial across Germany. Ministers, generals, and Nazi leaders were arrested, shot, or murdered in their own homes. No resistance was possible. The violence came from the very center of power. The SS, following Hitler's direct orders, eliminated Ernst Röhm and the SA leadership in a coordinated operation across several cities. The bodies were secretly buried, documents destroyed, and the official death toll reduced to conceal the scale of the massacre. What began as an internal purge became the first demonstration that the Nazi regime could eliminate anyone, even its own founders. What secrets were hidden behind the official version? Why was violence justified as law? And what hidden consequences did this massacre have for the future of the Third Reich? The rise of Hitler, the power-sharing dilemma. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of the German Reich in a political move that many contemporaries considered temporary. President Paul von Hindenburg had finally bowed to pressure, but he retained broad constitutional powers, including supreme command of the Reichswehr, the ability to dissolve the Reichstag, and the right to appoint and dismiss chancellors. Germany remained formally a parliamentary republic under the Weimar Constitution, and Hitler began his term with considerable institutional limitations. The composition of the cabinet reflected this reality. Only 3 of the 11 ministers belonged to the German National Socialist Party. The rest were conservatives linked to Franz von Papen, appointed vice-chancellor with the explicit mission of controlling Hitler's ambitions. The presence of Alfred Hugenberg, leader of the German National People's Party, consolidated this alliance with sectors of the traditional right. The new chancellor had to negotiate every important decision with allies who hoped to use him for their own ends. This power-sharing structure was complemented by the survival of autonomous institutions. The Reichswehr retained its Prussian traditions, and its professional officers remained loyal to Hindenburg, not to the new government. Major industrialists had partially financed the Nazi movement, but they expected stability and policies favorable to private enterprise, not revolutionary experiments. The state bureaucracy, inherited from the Weimar Republic and in some cases from the Empire, operated according to established procedures that were independent of the National Socialist Party. However, Hitler had an asset that his conservative allies had underestimated: the SA, or Sturmabteilung, known as the Brown Shirts. Under the leadership of Ernst Röhm, this paramilitary organization had grown exponentially since the late 1920s. By January 1933, it had exceeded 2.5 million members, a staggering number compared to the 100,000 soldiers of the Reichswehr, which was limited by the Treaty of Versailles. The SA represented a parallel army whose loyalty lay with the Nazi Party, not the traditional institutions of the state. The SA's original function had been street fighting against communists, social democrats, and other political opponents. During election campaigns, they intimidated voters and disrupted rival rallies. Their social composition clearly differentiated them from the Reichswehr. They were composed primarily of the unemployed, workers, and war veterans frustrated by the defeat of 1918. While the professional army upheld aristocratic codes of honor, the SA responded to a logic of massive and violent political combat. The first months of 1933 demonstrated the effectiveness of this paramilitary force in consolidating Nazi power. The SA actively participated in the repression of political opponents and the implementation of exceptional measures that transformed the German political system. This process drastically reduced German political pluralism, but did not eliminate all autonomous centers of power. The Reichswehr maintained its professional structure and its ties to Hindenburg. Industrial circles retained economic influence. The bureaucracy operated according to established procedures. Hitler had gained control of the formal political system, but he still relied on the cooperation of these sectors to govern effectively. The central tension within the regime emerged from this contradiction. The SA hoped that its role in the Nazi rise would translate into a profound social transformation. Röhm and his followers openly spoke of a second revolution that would eliminate traditional elites and create a new order. This perspective clashed directly with the interests of the conservatives, industrialists, and military men who had accepted Hitler precisely to avoid a social revolution. The Reichswehr viewed the SA as an existential threat. The generals distrusted this armed mass that vastly outnumbered the professional army. Werner von Blomberg, Minister of Defense, and Werner von Fritsch, Chief of the General Staff, repeatedly warned Hitler about the incompatibility between his rearmament ambitions and the existence of an uncontrolled paramilitary force. Industrialists shared these concerns from an economic perspective. They had funded the NSDAP, hoping for political stability and protection against communism. The SA's revolutionary rhetoric about displacing capitalists and creating National Socialism jeopardized their investments and social standing. Figures like Gustav Krupp and Fritz Thyssen began quietly lobbying for Hitler to rein in his brown shirts. Hindenburg represented the most powerful symbol of this conservative resistance. The elderly marshal embodied continuity with the German Empire and held moral authority over broad sectors of the population. His distrust of the SA was well known, and his ability to depose Hitler by declaring martial law posed a real threat to the stability of the new regime. During 1933 and early 1934, these tensions progressively intensified. Hitler found himself caught between the revolutionary expectations of the SA and conservative demands for order and stability. Maintaining Röhm's support meant risking the cooperation of the army, industry, and Hindenburg. Sacrificing the SA meant betraying the force that had brought the party to power and facing the resistance of millions of armed brownshirts. The balance became increasingly precarious. Röhm intensified his declarations about the need to continue the revolution and oust the reactionaries. The generals expressed growing impatience with the SA's indiscipline. Industrialists threatened to withdraw their support if stability was not guaranteed. Hindenburg made it clear that his tolerance had limits. In this context of growing tensions, figures such as Heinrich Himmler, Hermann Göring, and Reinhard Heydrich began to develop plans to resolve the crisis by physically eliminating Röhm and his circle. The conspiracy that was brewing during the first months of 1934 responded as much to personal ambitions as to the political logic of the moment. The Nazi regime was facing its first serious internal crisis, and its resolution would determine its future development. Ernst Röhm and the SA, an army within the party. Ernst Röhm embodied the most radical revolutionary spirit of National Socialism. Born in 1887 in Munich, he forged his character in the trenches of the First World War, where he served as an officer and was wounded multiple times. The facial scars he retained from those battles marked not only his physical appearance but also his worldview. He fervently believed that violence was the natural instrument for resolving political conflicts. After Germany's defeat and the collapse of the empire, Röhm became actively involved in the Freikorps, paramilitary forces fighting communist insurrections in Bavaria. There, he developed his experience in urban warfare and consolidated a network of contacts among disaffected veterans. His ability to organize and command armed men made him a respected figure in far-right circles in southern Germany. It was precisely in this environment that he established his first ties with Adolf Hitler. The relationship between the two men dated back to the very origins of the Nazi movement. Röhm had participated in the creation of the Sturmabteilung, the assault sections that initially functioned as protective guards at party rallies. His military experience and connections with former soldiers were decisive in transforming this small protection group into a massive paramilitary organization. During the 1920s, while Hitler developed the movement's political strategy, Röhm focused on building the physical force to support that strategy. The expansion of the SA under his leadership was extraordinary. From a few hundred men in the early 1920s, the organization reached massive dimensions that rivaled traditional state institutions. This human mass was not simply a political militia. It represented a complete social movement with its own culture, hierarchies, and aspirations. The brownshirts had their own ranks, ceremonies, songs, and codes of honor that rivaled those of the traditional army. The social composition of the SA reflected the tensions of the Weimar Republic. Its ranks were primarily made up of the unemployed industrial workers, war veterans with no economic prospects, and young men from middle classes impoverished by inflation and economic crisis. For these men, the SA offered something German society had denied them: dignity, purpose, and the promise of a better future. Röhm understood this psychology perfectly and channeled it toward concrete political goals. The ideology Röhm developed for the SA differed substantially from the line Hitler adopted in his negotiations with conservative sectors. While the future Führer sought tactical agreements with industrialists and professional soldiers, Röhm preached a genuine social revolution. His concept of National Socialism included the elimination of class distinctions, the destruction of aristocratic privileges, and the creation of a new elite based on revolutionary merit and sacrifice for the fatherland. This vision had concrete implications for the organization of the German state. Röhm considered the Reichswehr to represent the past, a caste army dominated by aristocratic officers who had lost the war and accepted the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles. The SA, in his view, embodied the future, a people's army composed of authentic Germans willing to fight for national restoration. His stated goal was to absorb the Reichswehr into the SA, creating a unified military force under his personal command. Röhm's public statements on this subject left no doubt about his intentions. In speeches to rallies of brownshirts, he claimed that the National Socialist Revolution had barely begun. He used terms like Second Revolution to describe the phase that would follow the seizure of power, a stage in which the SA would play a leading role. This rhetoric deeply disturbed the conservative sectors that had supported Hitler's rise. The personal relationship between Hitler and Röhm added complexity to this situation. The two addressed each other familiarly, using the informal du instead of the formal Sie. Röhm was one of the few Nazi leaders who allowed himself to openly disagree with the Führer, something he interpreted as proof of his importance within the movement. This trust, however, began to prove problematic when Hitler needed to demonstrate respectability before conservative audiences. Tensions were exacerbated by differences in style and method. Hitler had developed a sophisticated understanding of political power, which included the use of propaganda, the manipulation of public opinion, and the building of tactical alliances. Röhm, in contrast, relied on more direct methods: physical intimidation, the demonstration of force, and imposition through violence. For him, politics was an extension of warfare, and the SA was its natural instrument. Röhm's homosexuality was known in internal party circles, although it was not publicly discussed. Hitler had shielded his old comrade from criticism from conservative sectors of the movement, arguing that his private life was irrelevant compared to the services rendered to National Socialism. However, this situation provided a vulnerable element that internal enemies could exploit when the time came. During 1933, as Hitler consolidated his power as Chancellor, Röhm intensified his demands for a leading role for the SA. He presented formal proposals to absorb the Reichswehr and gave speeches critical of the Führer's moderation. In private conversations, he even expressed contempt for Hitler, an attitude that reflected his growing frustration with the direction of the regime. The SA under Röhm functioned as a state within a state. They had their own internal courts, intelligence services, and financing systems. They controlled sectors of several German cities where official authority was purely nominal. Their regional leaders acted as local warlords, making decisions that often contradicted central government directives. This autonomy represented both the organization's fundamental strength and weakness. The SA's numerical growth had created internal control problems. With more than 3 million members spread across Germany, Röhm could not directly oversee all of the organization's activities. Many local leaders interpreted the revolutionary rhetoric according to their own criteria, occasionally resulting in excesses that compromised the regime's image among conservative sectors. The SA's hierarchical structure replicated that of the traditional army, but with distinctive elements that reflected its revolutionary character. Ranks had specific names, and uniforms incorporated symbols that visually competed with those of the professional army. SA ceremonies included oath-taking rituals that emphasized personal loyalty to Röhm and the National Socialist movement, establishing a chain of command that potentially rivaled that of the state. Röhm's pressure on Hitler to radicalize the regime intensified during the first months of 1934. In January of that year, he formally presented his proposal for a merger with the Reichswehr to Minister Werner von Blomberg, who categorically rejected it. This official refusal gave Röhm grounds to claim that reactionaries were sabotaging the National Socialist Revolution from within the government itself. Röhm's ambitions transcended the military to encompass social and economic aspects. He spoke of creating a new aristocracy based on service to the fatherland, where SA veterans would occupy leadership positions in all sectors of German society. This vision implied the displacement of traditional elites, something that alarmed both conservatives and sectors of the Nazi Party itself that had established ties to those elites. The growing tension between Röhm's aspirations and Hitler's political demands created an untenable situation that demanded resolution. The SA had fulfilled its historic role in bringing the party to power, but its persistence as an autonomous force threatened the stability of the regime they had helped to create. The conspiracy against Röhm, the plan to eliminate the SA. Heinrich Himmler viewed Ernst Röhm's rise with a mixture of political calculation and personal ambition. As head of the SS, Himmler had built an organization that was technically dependent on the SA, but in practice operated according to entirely different principles. While Röhm led a mass militia composed of popular elements, Himmler aspired to create a select elite based on racial criteria and absolute loyalty. The existence of the SA as the dominant force represented a direct obstacle to his plans to transform the SS into the core of the new German order. Himmler's strategy was based on patience and the gradual accumulation of power. During 1933, while Röhm publicly clashed with conservative factions, Himmler established discreet contacts with influential figures within the regime. His most valuable collaborator in this endeavor was Reinhard Heydrich, a former naval officer who had developed extraordinary skills in espionage and information manipulation. Together, they built an intelligence network that provided them with detailed information on the activities of the SA leaders. Hermann Göring joined this conspiracy from a different position of power. As Prussian Minister of the Interior, he controlled the police force of Germany's most important state and had considerable resources for covert operations. Göring saw Röhm as a competitor in the struggle for influence over Hitler, but also as a threat to the stability he needed to consolidate his position in the regime. His participation in the conspiracy guaranteed him the support of Himmler and Heydrich in future power struggles. The intelligence work directed by Heydrich focused on documenting alleged connections between the SA and enemies of the regime. Through the SD, the SS security service, reports were fabricated that portrayed Röhm as the center of a vast conspiracy. These documents claimed that the SA leader maintained secret contacts with French diplomats, received foreign funding, and was planning a coup d'état for mid-1934. The methodology was simple but effective. Routine encounters were reinterpreted as conspiratorial meetings. Critical comments were exaggerated into evidence of treason. The construction of this false dossier required a degree of plausibility to be convincing. Heydrich used real statements by Röhm about the need to continue the revolution, but presented them as evidence that he was planning to overthrow Hitler. Photographs of SA leaders at social gatherings were recontextualized as images of conspiracy meetings. Wiretapped conversations were edited to eliminate context and highlight phrases that could be interpreted as subversive. Franz von Papen represented the external pressure that complemented these internal maneuvers. The conservative vice-chancellor intensified his public criticism of the regime's direction, culminating in his Marburg speech, where he called for a return to constitutional legality. Although he did not specifically mention Röhm, his message was interpreted as a direct warning against revolutionary ambitions. The Marburg speech had immediate consequences. Goebbels banned its publication in the press, but the text had already circulated among conservative circles and foreign diplomats. For Hitler, Papen's intervention represented an alarming sign that he was losing the support of sectors that had been crucial to his rise to power. Pressure intensified when Hindenburg expressed his support for his vice-chancellor's words. German business circles had followed Röhm's revolutionary rhetoric with growing concern. Industrialists such as Gustav Krupp and Fritz Thyssen had invested considerable sums in supporting the Nazi Party, hoping for political stability and policies favorable to capital. The prospect of a second revolution that would displace the traditional economic elites directly threatened their interests. Through discreet channels, these sectors conveyed to Hitler that their future collaboration depended on his control of the SA. Hindenburg personified the traditional authority that could still limit Hitler's actions. In June 1934, the aging president delivered his ultimatum. If Hitler did not control the SA, he would declare martial law and transfer power to the military. Building the case against Röhm required elements that could discredit him not only politically, but also morally. The SA leader's homosexuality provided this additional component. Heydrich collected testimonies and information about the private lives of Röhm and other SA leaders, presenting them as evidence of moral corruption. In the social context of the 1930s, these accusations had a devastating impact on public reputations. The dossier included detailed descriptions of alleged orgies and behaviors that contradicted the image of discipline the SA sought to project. The chronology of the conspiracy accelerated during the final weeks of June 1934. The conspirators had managed to convince Hitler that he faced an immediate threat, but they needed an opportune moment to act. The decision to summon the SA leaders to a meeting in Bad Wiessee provided the perfect opportunity. Röhm had planned this meeting as a show of unity within the movement. His enemies would use it as a trap to eliminate him. Joseph Goebbels played a crucial role in the propaganda preparations for the operation. As Minister of Propaganda, he was responsible for constructing the public narrative that would justify the events. Goebbels prepared communiques that would present any action against the SA as a preemptive measure against an imminent coup d'état. His strategy included the immediate dissemination of accusations of homosexuality against Röhm, using sexual morality as a political weapon to delegitimize the SA in the eyes of conservative public opinion. The participation of military units in the operation required careful coordination. Although the Reichswehr would not directly participate in the arrests and executions, its benevolent neutrality was essential to the plan's success. The generals had made it clear that they would welcome the elimination of their rival, but they needed to maintain an official distance to preserve their professional reputation. This attitude allowed the conspirators to count on the army not intervening to protect the SA. Himmler's SS would become the instrument of the purge. Its smaller size compared to the SA was offset by its superior organization and discipline. Heydrich had identified the SA leaders who needed to be eliminated and had prepared detailed lists with names, addresses, and routines. The SS had the advantage in terms of preparation and surprise, while the SA, confident in its historical relationship with Hitler, did not expect an insider attack. The operation also required the elimination of non-SA figures who posed potential threats to the regime. Gregor Strasser, a former leader of the Nazi Party's left wing, had been included on the target lists. Kurt von Schleicher, a former chancellor who had tried to block Hitler's rise, was also targeted. These additional names transformed the operation from an internal purge into a broader liquidation of political opponents. The atmosphere of conspiracy had reached its peak when Hitler received reports that Röhm had advanced his alleged coup plans. These reports, fabricated by Heydrich, claimed that the SA would be preparing to act during the weekend of June 30th. The artificial urgency created by this false information provided the final justification Hitler needed to authorize the operation. The trap had been perfectly laid, and the moment to execute it had arrived. Operation Hummingbird, the Night of the Long Knives. On June 29, 1934, Hitler attended Joseph Terboven's wedding in Essen, maintaining a facade of normality while the final preparations for the operation proceeded in secret. Since the celebration, he had established telephone contact with his key collaborators. Goering remained in Berlin coordinating the Prussian police forces. Himmler oversaw the mobilization of SS units in various German cities. Goebbels had prepared the communiques that would publicly justify the events that were about to unfold. The summons to the SA leaders to meet at the Hotel Hanselbauer in Bad Wiessee had gone according to plan. Röhm and his inner circle had traveled to the Bavarian Spa, believing they would be participating in a unity conference with Hitler. Edmund Heines, the SA leader in Silesia, and other regional leaders had already arrived at the hotel. Concentrating key targets in one location greatly simplified the logistics of the operation. During the night of June 29th to 30th, Hitler received urgent reports from Goering about suspicious SA movements in Berlin. These reports, previously prepared by Heydrich, described concentrations of brownshirts supposedly preparing to occupy government buildings. The information was completely false, but it provided the final justification Hitler needed to authorize immediate action. The code word Hummingbird was transmitted by Goebbels to Goering shortly after midnight on June 30th. This signal simultaneously activated operations in multiple German cities. In Berlin, SS units and Prussian police began arresting SA leaders at their homes. Lists prepared by Heydrich guided these arrests with surgical precision. The targets were surprised during the early hours of the morning, when resistance was least likely. Hitler left Essen by plane for Munich, accompanied by his personal guard and a select group of SS officers. The flight passed in tense silence as the Führer mentally reviewed the arguments he would use to justify what he was about to do. Upon landing in the Bavarian capital, he went directly to the local police headquarters to ensure that the regional authorities would cooperate with the operation. The arrival at the Hotel Hanselbauer occurred shortly before 7 in the morning. Hitler entered the building accompanied by armed SS officers, went directly to the second floor, and went to Röhm's room. The meeting between the two old comrades lasted only a few minutes. Hitler accused Röhm of treason, informed him he was under arrest, and ordered his immediate transfer to Stadelheim prison in Munich. The surprise was complete. Röhm offered no physical resistance and was taken there without incident. In the next room, Edmund Heinz was found in bed next to a young SA adjutant. Both were immediately executed on the spot on Hitler's direct orders. This episode provided the element of the sex scandal that Goebbels would later use to justify the operation to a conservative public. Photographs of the scene were taken as evidence of the supposed moral corruption that infected the SA. Other SA leaders staying at the hotel were systematically arrested room by room. Karl Ernst, head of the SA in Berlin, was arrested while preparing for his honeymoon. August Schneidhuber, leader of the Bavarian SA, was also captured without any chance of resistance. Within an hour, the SA leadership had been completely dismantled in its own stronghold of Bad Wiessee. At the same time, the operations in Berlin reached their climax. Kurt von Schleicher, former German Chancellor, was murdered in his home along with his wife Elisabeth. The perpetrators were members of the SS who broke into the house under the pretext of making an arrest. Gregor Strasser, Hitler's former rival within the Nazi Party, was arrested at his home and taken to the Gestapo cellars, where he was executed by Heydrich himself. Erich Klausner, a leader of Catholic Action and a critic of the regime, was murdered in his office at the Ministry of Transport. Herbert von Bose, a close associate of Franz von Papen, suffered the same fate. These murders expanded the purge beyond the SA to include political opponents of various persuasions who had previously been marked for elimination. Vice-Chancellor Papen's office was surrounded by SS forces. Although Papen himself was placed under house arrest rather than executed, several members of his circle were murdered. This action sent a clear message to conservative circles. Even high-ranking government figures could be targeted if they opposed Hitler. At Stadelheim prison, the executions began on the afternoon of June 30th. The prisoners were individually called by name, led into the courtyard, and shot by firing squads of the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler under the command of Sepp Dietrich. The procedure was swift and without formalities. There was no reading of charges, no final statement, just the immediate execution. Among the victims in Stadelheim were August Schneidhuber, Wilhelm Schmid, and dozens of regional SA leaders. The executions continued throughout the night from June 30th to July 1st. The bodies were immediately removed and buried in unmarked mass graves, eliminating any possibility of them becoming symbols for future opponents. Röhm's situation presented a special dilemma for Hitler. Unlike other SA leaders, he could not be summarily executed without further explanation. His history as the founder of the SA and his personal friendship with Hitler required different treatment. On July 1st, Hitler authorized the option of suicide as a gesture of recognition for his past service to the movement. 2 SS officers, Theodor Eicke and Michael Lippert, entered Röhm's cell in Stadelheim prison. They handed him a loaded pistol and told him he had 10 minutes to use it. Röhm rejected the offer, replying that if he had to die, he preferred it to be at German hands, not his own. After the deadline, Lippert shot him multiple times, ending the life of the man who had built the armed wing of National Socialism. The operations extended to cities such as Rockwar, Hanover, Dortmund, and Stuttgart. In each location, local SS commanders executed specific target lists. The coordination was remarkable considering the communication limitations of the time. The units operated with precise knowledge of the names, addresses, and routines of their victims, reflecting the prior intelligence work carried out by Heydrich's SD. In many cases, executions were carried out in private homes to avoid gatherings that might generate organized resistance. Methods varied according to local circumstances. Some targets were shot immediately upon arrest, others were taken to remote locations where they could be eliminated without witnesses. The diversity of methods reflected the delegation of authority to local commanders within a general operational framework. The second day of July marked the official end of the operation. Hitler declared the exceptional measures over and authorized the public release of a simplified version of events. According to the official statement, the government had uncovered and neutralized a conspiracy against the state led by traitors planning a coup d'état. The official death toll was set at 85, although later estimates suggest the actual number was considerably higher. The destruction of documents began immediately after the operation was concluded. The SS systematically eliminated evidence of pre-planning and target lists. Detailed reports on execution methods were classified or destroyed. This elimination of traces would later make it difficult to establish the exact extent of the purge and the specific criteria used to select victims. Executions and propaganda, the machinery of Nazi terror. The Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler operated with mechanical efficiency in the Stadelheim prison yard. Under the command of Sepp Dietrich, these elite soldiers had transformed executions into an industrialized process. The condemned men were led from their cells at regular 15-minute intervals. There was no ceremony or last words, simply the order to position themselves against the wall, the discharge of rifles, and the immediate removal of the body. Dietrich had received precise instructions from Hitler regarding the procedure. The executions were to be carried out without outside witnesses, and the bodies were to be removed immediately. Specialized teams transported the bodies in covered trucks to pre-prepared mass graves on the outskirts of Munich. The burials were carried out without individual identification, with remains being mixed to prevent future recognition or commemoration. In Berlin, methods differed depending on the specific circumstances of each case. Kurt von Schleicher was murdered in his study by a 3-man SS squad who burst in on the afternoon of June 30th. The former chancellor reached for a weapon but was shot before he could defend himself. His wife Elizabeth, who witnessed the scene, was also eliminated to prevent further testimony. The executioners searched the house to confiscate documents before reporting the incident as resisting arrest. Gregor Strasser suffered a different fate in the Gestapo cellars on Prince Albrecht Street. Heydrich personally supervised his execution using methods that combined psychological interrogation with physical violence. Strasser was subjected to hours of accusations about his supposed betrayal of the movement before being shot in the back of the head. His body was cremated on the Gestapo premises, completely eliminating physical evidence. The murders in private homes followed patterns established by the SS's previous experience in clandestine operations. The commandos arrived in civilian cars to avoid attracting attention from neighbors. They used false credentials identifying the perpetrators as criminal police or state security officials. The victims were eliminated with silenced weapons whenever possible or by methods simulating domestic accidents. The execution of Erich Klausener at the Ministry of Transport required more complex logistics. The government building had regular security and multiple potential witnesses. The assassins entered during normal working hours, identified themselves as Gestapo agents making a routine arrest, and led Klausener to his own office. There they shot him once in the head and staged a suicide. The official version stated that Klausener had taken his own life after his involvement in the plot against Hitler was discovered. Herbert von Bose, a collaborator of Franz von Papen, was assassinated under similar circumstances inside the Chancellery. His death served to directly intimidate the Vice-Chancellor, demonstrating that even high-ranking officials working in official buildings could be eliminated without consequence. The message was unequivocal. Proximity to power did not guarantee protection if someone opposed Hitler's will. The SS developed specific protocols to minimize victims' resistance. Arrests were carried out during the early hours of the morning when the targets were disoriented from sleep. The element of surprise was exploited through simultaneous raids on multiple access points. The commandos always included personnel experienced in urban combat to quickly neutralize any attempt at armed resistance. Physical elimination methods varied according to logistical considerations. In densely populated urban areas, silenced firearms or methods that did not generate excessive noise were preferred. In rural or isolated locations, conventional weapons were used without concern for noise. Some targets were strangled manually to completely eliminate ballistic evidence. The diversity of methods responded to Himmler's instructions regarding the need to adapt the techniques to each specific situation. Joseph Goebbels simultaneously coordinated the construction of the public narrative that would justify these assassinations. From the propaganda ministry, he oversaw the preparation of communiques that presented the events as a national defense operation against conspirators. His strategy included three central elements: the magnitude of the threat supposedly neutralized, the effectiveness of the government's response, and the moral corruption of those eliminated. Röhm's homosexuality became the most exploited propaganda element. Goebbels used this information to retrospectively discredit the entire SA leadership among conservative audiences. Sexuality thus became a political weapon that complemented accusations of military treason. The victims were systematically stripped of their humanity through official propaganda. Goebbels used terms like traitors, corrupt, and enemies of the people to describe people who until just a few days earlier had been presented as heroes of the National Socialist movement. This rewriting of recent history demonstrated the regime's ability to manipulate collective memory according to the political needs of the moment. The official figure of 85 victims was deliberately downplayed to reduce the psychological impact on the German population. Goebbels believed that excessively high numbers could generate alarm about the stability of the regime or sympathy for the victims. The selected figure suggested a controlled surgical operation, not an indiscriminate massacre. Subsequent research has established that the actual number of those executed probably exceeded 200, including secondary victims and cases not officially documented. The systematic destruction of evidence began immediately after the executions. The SS incinerated documents related to operational planning, hit lists, and detailed reports on the methods used. Medical records from autopsies were falsified or eliminated. Compromising photographs were selectively retained, only those useful for propaganda purposes, while those that might demonstrate the brutality of the methods employed were destroyed. The burial sites were kept completely secret to prevent future pilgrimages or commemorations. The families of the victims were not informed about the location of the remains. In many cases, they were prohibited from holding funeral ceremonies or publishing obituaries in the press. This denial of normal mourning rituals was part of the strategy to erase the memory of those killed. The effectiveness of the repressive machinery demonstrated during the Night of the Long Knives established operational precedents that would be systematically applied in later years. The protocols developed for mass arrests, summary executions, and evidence disposal were refined and expanded for use against other target groups. The technical experience gained in 1934 provided the methodological basis for the Third Reich's massive repressive operations. The SS units involved in the operation were rewarded with promotions and special decorations. Sepp Dietrich received personal recognition from Hitler for his efficiency at Stadelheim. Theodor Eicke, Röhm's direct executioner, was promoted to command the concentration camps, where he would apply the methods developed during the purge on an industrial scale. This promotion of executioners sent the message that loyalty demonstrated through acts of extreme violence would be institutionally rewarded, the legitimization of crime, Hitler as supreme judge. On July 3, 1934, the Reich cabinet met in extraordinary session to address the situation created by the events of the preceding days. The ministers present were familiar with the basic details of what had happened, but they needed a legal framework that would transform the murders into legitimate acts of state. Werner von Blomberg, Minister of Defense, had prepared a draft law that would provide this legal framework. The law approved that morning consisted of a single article, the brevity of which belied its revolutionary scope. The text established that the measures adopted on June 30th, July 1st, and July 2nd constituted legitimate defense of the state and were therefore legal. This formulation eliminated any possibility of subsequent judicial investigation and retrospectively shielded all acts committed during the operation. Carl Schmitt, the most influential jurist of the time, immediately published an analysis that provided a theoretical foundation for this exceptional legislation. His article, "The Führer Protects the Law," argued that, in situations of existential emergency, the political leader embodied the ultimate source of legality. According to Schmitt, Hitler had not violated the law but had created it through his sovereign decision. This doctrine transformed the personal will of the Führer into the supreme criterion of legality. Schmidt's argument was based on the distinction between formal legality and substantial legitimacy. Ordinary judicial procedures, he argued, were inadequate to deal with extraordinary threats that jeopardized the very existence of the state. In such circumstances, the supreme authority had to act directly and immediately, creating law through its decision. The purge had been, from this perspective, an act of legal creation, not legal destruction. Werner von Blomberg issued an official statement on behalf of the Reichswehr expressing gratitude to Hitler for eliminating the threat the SA posed to military discipline. The Defense Ministry communiqué emphasized that the army had regained its position as Germany's sole legitimate armed force. This public declaration by the military establishment provided crucial institutional legitimacy for Hitler's actions. Paul von Hindenburg, from his residence in Neudeck, sent a congratulatory telegram that became a central element of the official justification. The president's message expressed gratitude for having saved the German people from grave internal dangers and for having restored tranquility and order. Hindenburg's moral authority, a living symbol of German tradition, lent historical support to the operation. Industrial circles expressed their support through public statements from their main associations. Gustav Krupp, president of the Confederation of German Industry, issued a statement praising Hitler's decision to curb the revolutionary tendencies that threatened economic stability. Fritz Thyssen and other industrial magnates expressed similar sentiments, confirming that German capital supported the measures taken. The state bureaucracy quickly adapted to the new legal situation. Official records were altered to reflect that the victims had been executed for treason against the state rather than extrajudicially killed. Death certificates were issued with causes of death that obscured the true circumstances. Court records removed any reference to pending investigations into the events. Joseph Goebbels organized a coordinated press campaign presenting retroactive legalization as a necessary and appropriate measure. German newspapers published editorials explaining that exceptional circumstances had required exceptional methods. The official narrative emphasized that Hitler had acted as the savior of the nation in the face of conspirators threatening to destroy Germany from within. On July 13th, Hitler appeared before the Reichstag to offer his definitive version of events. His speech was carefully structured to combine legal justification, heroic narrative, and dissuasive warning. The Führer presented himself as a leader who had assumed personal responsibility to protect Germany from its internal enemies, acting when ordinary institutions proved inadequate. During his speech, Hitler used specific terminology that conceptually redefined what had happened. There had been no murders, but executions of traitors. There had been no internal conspiracy, but legitimate defense of the state. It was not arbitrary violence, but summary justice administered by the supreme judge of the German people. This linguistic reformulation transformed crimes into legitimate acts of state. The speech included a section dedicated to justifying the elimination of non-SA victims. Hitler explained that the operation had taken the opportunity to finally cleanse German political life of elements who, while not directly involved in the Röhm plot, represented latent threats to national stability. This retroactive expansion of the operational scope normalized the inclusion of secondary targets in future similar actions. The Reichstag deputies, who had belonged exclusively to the Nazi Party since July of the previous year, unanimously ratified Hitler's words with a standing ovation. This parliamentary approval provided the formal democratic seal that completed the institutional legitimation of the purge. The German parliament had officially made extrajudicial killings an approved state policy. The German Catholic Church, through its leading bishops, issued carefully worded statements that avoided directly condemning the violence but expressed satisfaction with the elimination of elements considered immoral. The church hierarchy focused on the aspects of sexual corruption attributed to Röhm and his associates, presenting the purge as a necessary moral cleansing. German professional organizations, lawyers, doctors, engineers, teachers, publicly aligned themselves with the official justification through statements from their professional associations. These declarations institutionalized the acceptance of summary state violence among the country's educated elites. The legitimization thus transcended political circles to encompass broad sectors of civil society. German courts immediately ceased all investigations into deaths that occurred during the operation. Judges were instructed to permanently close pending cases. Prosecutors were informed that they should not initiate proceedings related to the events. This paralysis of the judicial system completed the legal immunity of the perpetrators. The principle established through this retroactive legitimization transcended the specific case of the Night of the Long Knives. By accepting that Hitler's will could transform crimes into legal acts by subsequent decree, German institutions had virtually eliminated all legal limits on the Führer's power. Any future action could be justified using the same mechanism of retroactive legalization. Hindenburg's death on August 2nd removed the last formal obstacle to the total concentration of power in Hitler's hands. On the same day as the president's death, the cabinet passed a law merging the offices of chancellor and president in the person of the Führer. The army immediately swore a new oath of personal loyalty to Hitler, definitively consolidating the system of absolute power. Total dictatorship, Hitler master of the Reich. Victor Lutzer assumed leadership of the SA in August 1934 with precise instructions from Hitler regarding his new role. Unlike his predecessor, Lutzer lacked independent political ambitions and historical ties to the Nazi movement that would have granted him autonomy. His appointment represented the complete domestication of an organization that had been transformed from a revolutionary force into a ceremonial instrument. The restructuring of the SA under Lutzer systematically eliminated all the elements that had characterized its period under Röhm. The upper ranks were filled by party officials loyal to the party rather than independent, military-minded veterans. Training programs were modified to emphasize discipline and obedience rather than combat readiness. The main activities became parades, public ceremonies, and auxiliary propaganda tasks. The numerical reduction was drastic and deliberate. The figure progressively declined until it stabilized at approximately 1.2 million by 1938. This decline was not the result of mass desertions, but rather a systematic policy of non-renewal of membership and the transfer of more capable members to other organizations within the regime. Heinrich Himmler emerged as the principal beneficiary of the transformation of the German paramilitary landscape. Röhm's elimination had freed the SS from its formal subordination to the SA, allowing it to develop as an independent organization under Hitler's direct control. Himmler used this opportunity to expand the SS's powers beyond the Führer's personal security into areas of political policing and ideological control. The takeover of the concentration camps by the SS constituted one of the most significant institutional changes of the post-purge period. Theodor Eicke, rewarded for his role in Röhm's execution, was appointed inspector of concentration camps with the authority to establish uniform procedures throughout the system. The methods developed during the Night of the Long Knives, summary execution, elimination of evidence, psychological neutralization of victims, were institutionalized as standard operating protocols. The Gestapo underwent a similar expansion under Himmler and Heydrich. The effectiveness demonstrated during the operation against the SA provided grounds for expanding its resources and powers. Heinrich Müller, an expert in interrogation techniques who had participated in the purge, was promoted to positions of greater responsibility where he would perfect the repressive methods initially used against the brownshirts. The army's personal oath to Hitler on August 2nd represented the culmination of the process begun with Röhm's elimination. The generals who had viewed the growth of the SA with alarm now voluntarily accepted direct subordination to the Führer. Werner von Fritsch and other senior commanders interpreted this oath as confirmation that Hitler had definitively chosen the professional army over the people's militias. The military oath formula eliminated any reference to the constitution, the state, or abstract principles of service. German soldiers swore personal obedience to the Führer of the Reich and the German people, Adolf Hitler, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. This extreme personalization of military loyalty provided Hitler with an instrument of power that no previous German chancellor had possessed. Industrial sectors consolidated their alliance with the regime by creating new mechanisms for economic cooperation. The elimination of the SA had neutralized the voices within National Socialism that advocated anti-capitalist policies. Gustav Krupp and Fritz Thyssen established direct contacts with party officials to coordinate rearmament policies that would benefit both the regime and their companies. The state bureaucracy completed its Nazification process by applying the law for the restoration of the professional civil service to officials who had shown sympathy for Röhm's positions. The vacant positions were filled by Nazi party members who pledged unconditional loyalty to the new order. This administrative purge eliminated the last vestiges of institutional independence within the government apparatus. The transformation of the German judicial system accelerated after the purge. The special courts created to try political crimes were expanded and endowed with exceptional powers. During this period, Roland Freisler, future president of the People's Court, developed the summary procedures that would be systematically applied against political opponents. The experience of retroactive legalization following the Night of the Long Knives provided the legal precedent for these innovations. The German churches, both Catholic and Protestant, adapted their official positions to accommodate the new political reality. The Concordat signed with the Vatican in 1933 was reinterpreted to minimize areas of potential conflict with the regime. German Christians, a Protestant movement aligned with Nazism, gained influence within the mainline Protestant denominations. German education underwent a curricular transformation that reflected new ideological priorities. Textbooks were rewritten to present the purge as an example of decisive leadership in the face of internal betrayal. German universities introduced courses on defense of the state that used the events of 1934 as a case study of the need for absolute authority in crisis situations. The German press was subjected to stricter controls that eliminated any possibility of independent criticism or analysis. Goebbels's directives stipulated that the media should present Röhm's elimination as a definitive victory of order over chaos. Journalists who had maintained contact with SA circles were dismissed or transferred to positions without editorial influence. German foreign policy immediately benefited from Hitler's increased credibility with foreign governments. British and French diplomats interpreted the purge as evidence that the Führer was effectively controlling the most radical elements of National Socialism. This perception facilitated the negotiations that would culminate in the Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935 and the remilitarization of the Rhineland the following year. The precedent set by the retroactive legalization of state violence was systematically applied in subsequent years. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935, which institutionalized the persecution of German Jews, used the same legal mechanisms developed to justify the purge. Kristallnacht of 1938 was legitimized through similar procedures of retrospective decree. The operational methods perfected during the elimination of the SA were scaled up for use against entire populations. The techniques of mass detention, prisoner transportation, summary execution, and evidence disposal developed by Eicher and his collaborators provided the logistical foundation for later genocidal operations. Concentration camps evolved into extermination camps, utilizing the administrative experience gained in 1934. The personalized power structure created by Röhm's elimination proved durable during the war years. No subsequent Nazi leader seriously challenged Hitler's authority, having learned the lesson that internal opposition resulted in immediate physical elimination. This lack of internal checks and balances contributed to the regime's progressive radicalization toward increasingly extreme policies. The legitimation model developed during the Night of the Long Knives was exported to occupied territories during World War II. SS commanders applied the principle in Poland, the Soviet Union, and other countries that German authority could create law through sovereign decision, independently of pre-existing legal norms. This extrapolation of the 1934 precedent facilitated the implementation of genocidal policies on a continental scale.